We have directly a next panel, the last one, but maybe the best one, let's see. So panel 5, Migration in the EU, Poland's approach, Poland's perspective. And this session will be moderated by Dr. Edina Lila-Meszaros, that will replace Dr. Aleksandra Szczerba-Zawada, that is not here today. And among the speakers, we have Professor Witold Klaus, Dr. Tomasz Sieniow, Dr. Konrad Pędziwiat, Dr. Katerina Krakmalowa, and Mr. Dominik Wach. So may I invite you here. If anyone needs short technical break, toilet, please feel free. And we will have a short change in the turn of the speeches to be delivered, because some of our speakers joined us from other cities, from Krakow and from Lublin, and they have to catch their trains. So we will start with the presentation delivered by Konrad, and then by Tomasz, and finally by Witold, Katerina, and Dominik. Okay, so the floor is yours. So Edina, please.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to moderate our last panel, and all the presenters have one thing in common. They are going to speak about a Polish perspective on this issue of migration. So I would like to give the word to Mr. Konrad Pędziwiat from the Department of European Studies and the Faculty of Economics and International Relations from the Krakow University of Economics, to deliver his presentation entitled Politics of Fear and Securitization of Refugees in Poland.
Thank you very much for the organizers for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here and to listen to all the fantastic presentations. What I'd like to do within this 15 minutes allocated to take you to Poland and to tell you a little bit about how the refugees were framed by political elites in the last years, and how, as I will claim, this has had some impact on the attitudes of the society towards migrants and refugees. So one of the I'll advance two arguments. One of them goes more or less along these lines, that although Poland has been experiencing an inflow of migrants applying for international protection since the beginning of 1990s, this phenomenon was only occasionally subject of public debates and never really politicized. There was a certain moment, so-called affair with Simon Moll, at a certain moment, and a few other occasions when there was sort of refugees were part of a public debate, but never really politicized, securitized, and racialized to the level that took place in between the presidential and parliamentary elections in 2015 and in their aftermath. And I would claim that discursive and policy securitization has led to the creation of a moral panic around the supposed arrival of especially Muslim refugees to Poland, and the transformation of societal attitudes towards refugees in a country. And this societal shift of attitudes towards refugees you can clearly see on the SEBO's findings, which show that while in May 2015, this is the moment of the presidential elections, the majority of the Polish population were in favor of welcoming refugees to the country. And this is the blue statement, which says, yes, we should accept them until they will be able to return back to their own countries. And the minoritarian position was that Poland should not accept refugees. You can see here clearly how this blue sort of area is shrinking, and the red answers, namely these attitudes against the acceptance of refugees, is enlarging from May 2015 onwards, with in particular at the end of the 2015 and then 2016. And then we have also some other findings. There's a lot of research on this, a lot of polls. Another one is by Amnesty International that also shows how this cautious openness has transformed towards rejection of asylum seekers. And here you can see in comparative perspective that Poland is one of the least welcoming countries towards refugees, together with Russia and, for example, Thailand and Indonesia. On both graphs, this is the Amnesty International finding from 2016. So what I'm going to do quickly to tell you a little bit about the framework, the Poland and migration crisis very quickly, and especially the political narratives on migration crisis and some conclusions. So I draw from three major theoretical perspectives. One is a perspective initiated by Stanley Cohen, so the research on folk devils that was later developed by Gudi Ben Yehuda, who said that, who termed in a way the public this folk devils as the personification of evil that is stripped of favorable characteristics and imparted with exclusively negative ones. And this pursuit of folk devils intensified to the situation of moral panic, about which Gudi and Ben Yehuda said that the key features of this moral panic are a situation of strong concern over the behavior of certain group or category and the consequences which the behavior presumably causes to the rest of the society, an increased level of hostility towards the particular group, implying a division between us and them, remarkable consensus between stakeholders who usually hold wildly divergent views, and an exaggerated representation of their threats and disproportionate reaction to them, and a certain volatility. So the second element draws from Van Dijk and the ideas that elites play a very important role in initiating, channeling, and strengthening certain attitudes of rejection toward certain groups of people. And this is linked with the idea that elites have preferential access to discursive resources. One of the very important discursive areas, obviously, is this public sphere and especially the media. In a way, I go along Van Dijk claiming that the rise of anti-refugee attitudes in the Polish society can be traced and looked and described within the framework of so-called the elite racism. What is important is the politicization of migration. I'll drop this bit because securitization is very much similar sort of phenomenon which can be conceived in two ways. On the one hand, it can be conceived as a policy tool. So we had representative of Frontex, and there's plenty of studies that show how Frontex is securitizing migration within the European context. Vitek will be also talking about later about the legal policies towards refugees in Poland. This is how securitization works as a policy at the policy level, and there are many examples. But what I look mostly from discursive sort of analysis perspective is I look at the speech acts. So this is the element insecurity as a consequence of the socially and politically as a socially politically constructed phenomenon, and as a creation through a certain type of narratives and discourses. So obviously this is also has to do with the concept of new racism. What needs to be said here is basically that this securitization of migrations had a very strong, something that Brubaker calls civilizational element. So portraying the refugees above all as a civilizational threat, and portraying them as Muslim, essential Muslims, if not current terrorists, then future terrorists. So this is very close linked with the idea of anti-Muslim Islamophobia as a new form of racism, where Muslim culture is perceived in entirely deterministic and essentialized way, making in a way as a functional equivalent of biologically understood race. So person who holds certain religion is basically by default acting in a certain way. So this is very strongly advanced in all these positions. So the empirical analysis, going very quickly to it, is pretty broad, so I'll just give you some examples of it. We looked into, with a colleague of mine, Agnieszka Legud, into the political discourse, and especially the two major political parties in a period between May 2015 and the end of 2016. And this is one of the models we looked through, the Entman model, so looking how the narrative is actually framing the policy problem, the causes, the moral valuation, and the remedies. And the key element, obviously, in these narratives were the refugees. So, as you know, Poland, I'll drop this bit about the refugees, and at certain moments, our Prime Minister said that Poland has received about 1 million refugees from Ukraine. She said it in Jan 2016. And obviously, these are some of the figures of actually Ukrainian citizens who applied for applications of international protection and received it. So you can see the figures clearly, how this million actually translates into reality. So this and the relocation plan was discussed. So I'll drop this bit. What is very important is that. The initial securitization took place between May and August 2015. Initially, Polish politicians spoke a great deal about Christian refugees, and also there was a special. This was a result of a certain mobilization behind which stood an Estara Foundation that tried to bring Syrian Christians, which supposedly were the group mostly vulnerable and the group that suffered most as a consequence of the war, which obviously for anybody who knows anything about the war in Syria is clearly that this was not the case. But in a way, the government, the current government, which was the Civic Platform government at the time, actually bought into this, and Kopacz said in May 2015 that today Christians who are persecuted in a barbaric way deserve that a Christian country quickly reacts and offers them help. And it could be a separate presentation how the country acted in a way very irresponsibly in reaction to the action of the, let's say, civil society. But there was obviously the willingness to implement the relocation, but very reluctantly by the government. And I claim that in a way this has led also to the at that time opposition party, which was Law and Justice Party, opened them more space actually for the securitization. So in September, one of the key persons from the party, Brudzinski, said that we should not hurry to see the suburbs of Warsaw to resemble the suburbs of London and Paris. And there was a very strong contestation of the relocation scheme by the, at that time, opposition party. And on the hand of the Civic Platform, there were efforts to in a way, implement the relocation scheme, but to do it the most reluctantly they can, in a way. And then during the electoral campaign, this was a full-blown securitization and new racism, and I could give hundreds of examples. There are some of them. The key element was that we have a moral obligation not towards the refugees but towards the Polish descendants living in the former USSR. And there was a lot of talk and a lot of narrative about refugees as a danger. And in a way, at that time, the government fighting for the survival, the civic platform, tried to say that we care about the fact that we relocate the refugees, but we very strictly care about the security. And Kopacz, the prime minister at the time, said, "It's my duty as a prime minister. It is above all to solidarity with my own nation, ensuring that citizens, our compatriots, are safe." So, in a way, this was they in a way at that time the government bent into this very strong securitization framework, and after the elections, it very strongly continued. The Law and Justice Party very strongly initially said that they would implement the relocation scheme. Then they dropped the idea, and it was quite interesting because at that time it was also an initiative of Kukiz 15 to organize a referendum similar to the one that was held in Hungary on the reception of refugees, and in a way this whole idea became obsolete in a situation of an open refusal by the government to implement the relocation scheme. And even very interesting, there was very interesting relations between the government and the church, and the idea of opening up humanitarian corridors, especially before the arrival of the Pope to Poland in June 2016, and claiming that to show in a way that Poland also participates in the humanitarian effort in some way. The church wanted to say it, and the government very strongly said no. So to conclude, I wrote in 2011, and it actually surprises me that I wrote that in the piece about the new folk devil, that in a way. We should not overstate the level of anti-Muslim sentiments in Poland to warrant a discussion about the moral panic, although I wrote at that time there are fertile grounds for development of such a panic in the future. And I claim in a way that we have had from 2015 onwards a constant revival of a moral panic around especially refugees, and in particular Muslim refugees. This moral panic has been now shifting towards an old, in a way, folk devil, which is gay community. As I speak, this is what is happening in preparation for the new elections. But this element has been very much there, and it was in a way very strongly banalized. And one of the very important roles in this played also a national media, which was in a way nationalized or renationalized supposedly, and they played a very important role in what I claim normalizing this kind of nationalist populism and thickening it, giving it a real sense, and showing it in a daily basis, repeating to people the messages about the security threat that refugees, and in particular Muslim refugees, pose. And the last one, so what is interesting when obviously these are the two totally different parties, but you can see the degree of heterogeneity in their narratives, but both of them are playing on xenophobic tones to higher or lower degree. And they bear a crucial resemblance, in particular, framing refugees as a threat to public security and, in a way, disruption of our ways of life. And I believe the fact that these major political parties have been playing this dangerous game over the last years has led to the situation of first the societal shift in attitudes toward refugees and then the maintenance of this position, as you could see in the public polls. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now I would like to invite our second speaker, Dr. Tomasz Sieniov from the Institute of European Studies at John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin and Rule of Law Institute, to deliver his presentation entitled Polish Highly Effective Return Policy, at What Cost?
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank not only for inviting me here, but also for giving me this opportunity to listen to so many very interesting and fascinating, actually, presentations, and including the previous one. I very like the analysis of what has happened in Poland during the last 3 or 4 years. My topic would be about return policy and very effective return policy that Poland has. I started thinking of it because I've noticed that EU average effectiveness of implementation or enforcement of return decisions is about 40%, while Polish is over 90%. And I thought this must be something wrong here, or we are either so unfair to migrants, or there may be some other element here. And some other motivation that I had is that I've been helping for a couple of last years the refugees, failed refugees in detention centers that are deprived of legal assistance, and I've seen many probably incidents, not the norm, of not respecting their fundamental rights in the process of deportation. So I thought this might be some pattern here and the rule. So first of all, return directive, as you probably know, have been accepted in 2008, and it had implementation time till 2010, or in some respects by the Christmas Eve of 2011. The main goal of this directive I would summarize as establishment of an effective removal and repatriation policy based on common standards for the persons to be returned in a humane manner with full respect for their fundamental rights and dignity. Maybe I should underline dignity stronger than it is right now, but fundamental rights, it was the first thing that I thought that we may have an issue here. And then in the return directive, there are some procedural safeguards, and some of them are related to granting effective legal remedies to the people in the deportation process, in euphemistically speaking, return procedures. And second, that member states have, the first is that the person should at least have the decision in writing, stating the facts and the law, why the person is being returned, and also this individual may ask for translation, either oral or in writing. I think with the oral translations of those decisions, there may be some problem here, because in detention centers especially, how can you prove that this decision has been translated or not translated to you, when normally those decisions, when they are delivered to the refugees or failed refugees, irregular migrants, they deny signing them, receiving them, because they say, I don't know what the decision is about, with this main part only, or the main part, the first part being translated to them, and the ways of how they may appeal sometimes, if they can. So the second legal remedy is that effective remedy should be granted to the persons before a competent judicial or administrative authority, competent body composed of members who are impartial and who enjoy safeguards of independence. So it's basically, in Polish terms, it would mean the court, because only the courts would be independent in the sense of this Article 13. And Article 13 also gives this right to have this temporary suspension of enforcement of returns decision to those who have been given this decision, and maybe they appealed, or during the time of given for taking decision on appeal. So if you have a decision, you have 30 days to appeal it to the court. My understanding is that if according to Polish law, you have 30 days to appeal it. Within these 30 days, you cannot deport the person, return the person to the country of origin, because this person still has the right to judicial review. And this was one of the most, I think, critical moments that made me to look at that, because I know cases when people were not given this time to appeal, not only not because of some issue of state security, but I don't know, it's a 20-year-old mother with a 2-year-old child who has not been even sent the decision before the decision has been enforced. So her lawyer received the decision 5 days after she has been delivered to the country of origin, and there was no way to appeal it. And the bad thing is that the courts, they see no problem in that, in Poland, in this case, in this particular case. Okay. So Article 15 says also that in the return procedures, detention should be a measure of last resort, should be as short as possible, and should be periodically reviewed, and also speedy judicial review should be done on the lawfulness of detention. I think that in majority of cases the courts don't do the review of those decisions on detention, even the judicial decisions. The courts are very often following the instructions that were given by the border guards that are implementing this. The courts don't know the law on foreigners, and they pretty automatically are issuing these decisions on detention. And my client that spent the longest time in detention is the Afghan citizen that spent 20 months in detention. And at the end he was released. Right now he's waiting for his reunification with family in Germany, because his wife and children are in Germany, but he never had a lawyer. And there was no way to return him to Afghanistan, because he was in some special ethnic group that Afghans didn't want to have on their territory. So, he was for 20 months in detention, and it was very bad. And there are some families that spent over a year in the detention centers with children, and this also is something that made me to think about writing the paper about that. Legal remedies. The Article 13 gives you the right to obtain legal advice and representation when necessary linguistic assistance, and this necessary legal assistance and representation is granted on request free of charge. And this is troubling article, because I'm sure that Poland has not implemented that article, despite the fact that we have a general Polish administrative code rule that anybody can ask for a lawyer, asking the court on a special form, but the person that is a foreigner, not knowing the language, not having access to these forms, not having access to lawyers, cannot ask for a lawyer free of charge. So, there's this situation without solution, because to ask for a lawyer, you actually must have a lawyer first. So people in detention centers cannot ask for a lawyer, because they have to do it in Polish, on Polish forms, and they have very little access to translation services. Then, I looked at the effectiveness of the return decisions, and in 2017 we have a full data on that. There was over 500,000 non-EU citizens, TCNs, who were ordered to leave the member states, and almost 200,000 of them were effectively returned, which means that this was 36.6% of effectiveness of return decisions. In Poland in 2017, there was 24,000 non-EU citizens who were ordered to leave. 23,364, 94%, were effectively returned. Okay, you may think this is something, outrageous, but 16,000 of them were TCNs that probably were stopped when they were trying to leave the country, and they noticed that they miscalculated the number of days, and they probably were giving the decision on the way back to Ukraine. But still, there is additional 4,000 of people, 8,000 of people that have complied with the return decisions. 1,200 of them were returned by error. And this is this Polish Office of Foreigners and Polish Border Guard statistical bulletin. This is the source of this data. According to Eurostat data, in 2017 there was 22,000 returns from Poland. Voluntary, sorry for typo, was 21,000. So only 900 people were forcibly returned which means that, this voluntary returns in Poland are very effective. And I think this has something in common with the possibility of going by land to Ukraine, Belarus, or to Moldova through Ukraine, or to Russian Federation. So, what are the reasons for this effectiveness? First, neighboring countries are the countries where we send people back. Readmission agreement with Ukraine especially is very effective, that we send not only Ukrainian citizens but also people that came through Ukraine. And third, many legal stays are being detected at the moment of attempt to leave, so this is easy to just give the decision at the moment of leaving that you should leave, because you were planning to leave, you just spent a couple of more hours on the border waiting for the decision. And the entry ban, of course. And what are the concerns? The first concern is the state-funded legal aid representation is not in place. In 2017, there was a law on foreigners that was announced in 30th of January 2017. Yes, we'll do the border detention and border how do you say it? The border procedures on asylum applications, that you detain people on the border for 28 days before you decide if they are refugees or they are not. So we still have no system comparable to asylum system. In asylum procedures, you can appeal the decision of the first instance organ to the second instance, and it's paid by the state. But here, there is no system that is paid by the state, other than the appeal or request for the review by the administrative court, but you may not actually get this chance if you're deported earlier. Second, enforcing decisions during the time frame when the TCN can still ask for judicial review. I mentioned that. Lack of translation support. For example, foreigners that are having the evidence for some humanitarian reasons not to be returned, like potential tortures, malpractice of government in the country of origin, that would normally constitute also the ground for the asylum protection, but they sometimes give them only at the moment of deportation. If this is in a local original language, the border guards will not accept it. They say everything has to be sworn translated into Polish, and you have to do it at your cost. So they reject the evidence that is in other languages, and sometimes deport people in those situations. Detention is not a measure of last resort. No legal representation in detention center, in detention cases. So if person is being brought to the court and even the foreigner asks for a lawyer, the judge says, you don't need a lawyer, we'll decide that it's fair procedure. I will make sure that it's fair, and I will put you to detention center for 3 months. So this is the problem, yes. Of course, those pushbacks of asylum seekers at Terespol, I've heard a couple of times about this term here today. Terespol is a border with Belarus, and there are hundreds and maybe thousands, definitely thousands of asylum seekers that come to the Polish border and they say, I am applying for international protection in Poland. I am in danger in the country of origin. But the border guards are doing the first-hand interview with them, and they say, no, you have no visa, there's nothing wrong with you in the country of origin, go back. And they cannot file for asylum. Very often out of the train that brings 200 people, there's 2, 5, 10 only staying, and most of them want to apply for asylum. Many of them probably would abuse asylum procedure, but the border guards don't have the right to review the application, and they do. And AMIF, Asylum Migration Integration Fund, was frozen for NGOs that were helping in legal matters to the refugees for the last 3 years. Yesterday night, there was an announcement that there is a legal aid support by the government offered, and there's 1 month to apply for this legal aid for asylum seekers. So there's a good chance that some of those things may be improved a little bit, because if you have no NGOs that are supported by the EU funds, and you have no access to other lawyers, and foreigners don't have money, then they are completely alone. Right now, maybe there will be some brave organizations that would apply for that and maybe get this money. I will see. So I will return to this thesis that effective return policy must be based on common standards for persons to be returned in a humane manner with full respect for their fundamental rights and dignity. And I think at this point there is a systemic problem in Poland about that people lack legal representation and help. And actually I'm thinking that returning people to Poland via Dublin system is not fair to them, because if they are returned from the other member states of EU, they pretty much have a chance to get to detention, and then the process is very speedy, and they may not have lawyer, and they may be sent back very fast back home, because the asylum case will not be heard very thoroughly. So, last slide, I think. Plato, in the laws, has mentioned something about our obligations towards foreigners, and especially to asylum seekers. He calls them suppliants. There were some widows that were coming to ask for protection to one Greek city to at least bury the bodies of their husbands. And they're asking, grant us protection for this process. So he said that as to foreigners, one should regard agreements made with them as particularly sacrosanct. Practically, all offenses committed as between or against foreigners are quicker to attract the vengeance of God than offenses as between fellow citizens. The foreigner is not surrounded by friends and companions and steers the compassion of gods and men, and that much more. The most serious of offenses against foreigners or natives is always that affecting suppliants, meaning refugees. I think suppliants may be also failed refugees. And Plato also in natural law has identified this special obligation that you have towards foreigners, especially those in detention centers. I think when I ask the question at whose cost, especially the people that are in detention centers, this is at their cost. The effectiveness of our return policy is at the cost of people that are detained for a long time, months, sometimes years. So I think that this must be changed. Thank you.
Now I would like to give the floor to our third speaker, Professor Witold Klaus from the Department of Criminology, Institute of Law Studies, Polish Academy of Sciences and the Association for Legal Intervention, to deliver his presentation entitled Ambiguity of Polish Migration Law after 2015, between closing borders to refugees and welcoming Ukrainian workers.
Hello everyone, thank you for inviting me and give me the opportunity to present the paper. What I would like to present is some kind of ambiguity because in Polish law and in minds of Polish politicians, and this distinction between good and bad foreigners, like the good one or the better one are the Ukrainians, and the bad and the worst one are the refugees. And of course, how they apply policies towards them, completely different policies, and on completely different that has completely different aims. This is because we have two contradictory forces that drives Polish migration policy. On the one hand, we have ideology of Polishness, and Polish is under threat. There is theory that proposed Peter Vermersch about victimhood nationalism, and I think Polish case it suits very best to this term, that we are under threat, we should protect ourselves, and we are victims. We are victims of everything, of history, of bad people who try to invade us and try to conquer us and try to change our beliefs, our religion, our everything. So that's why we need to protect themselves from them. And we choose different kind of the enemy as Konrad presented. The one could be and was the refugees. And we have another angle, and the other angle is economy that is thriving in Poland, economy that needs employees, and to thrive needs people who be there and work for us. but not work as colleagues or equals. Then people who could be exploited in a very easy way and sent back if not necessary, and effectiveness of sending back, as Tomek said, is quite impressive in Polish case. So we could see the clash between two ministries, two forces within the government, between Ministry of Interior on the one hand, that is goes for security, and different ministries of responsible for economy, for labor. There were a number of them. I have different names that I couldn't forget because they changed so quickly. But I mean, we clearly see these classes, and depends which from which ministries the act is proposed. The aims are different. The approach is totally different. So we have two cornerstones of current migration policy. The one is security, and is the responsibilities of Minister of Interiors. And we should see that security is treated as a super right that overwhelms any other right. So if we claim that someone is threat to the security, we could use every sources that possible. You could invent new sources that could be effective to combat the enemy and to protect ourselves as we are under threat. So we could use and you could use different strategies like crime migration. It's mean you could blame migrants and try to make them present them as criminals, even they don't. But so it's a big branch of policies that goes in this direction, and the idea of detention is enrooted in this ideology to put people behind the bars, although they are not criminals. Another one is the idea by the German philosopher, the German philosopher, enemy criminal law. So we could prepare the law that criminalize people and their act ahead of the criminal act could be possibly committed. So it's not idea that is usually applied to criminal law, that we punish person for committing some crime. This we act before. We like a kind of sorcerer that we see that is. The crime is possible. The crime is approaching, and then we catch the possible perpetrator, punish them, for example, by expel them. And there's other sources, and another cornerstone is xenophobia. And I would claim that Polish society is xenophobic, and xenophobia is kind of enrooted in Polish mentality. And this support, my claim is supported by researchers and by findings from European Social Survey and presented in a paper by Kinga Wysiewska-Di Carlo, which shows that our attitudes are not, our attitudes against migrants are not. We're not against them because we see them as a threat. We just don't like them. We just don't like them to be here as our neighbors, as our colleagues. And that fits for Ukrainians as well. That shows why we distinguish Ukrainians from other nationalities. Because Ukrainians are ethnically similar. Of course, we have some differences. We share some differences, but they are small ones. And on the other hand, we have this real enemies that are different religiously and ethnically. So it's very easy to present them as a threat and just to hate them. So how the law is based on those contradictory ideas. And I start with asylum seekers and refugee law. First, on 2016, we have new act on anti-terrorist activities, and the act was voted just before Pope Francis came to Poland. The visit of Pope was in July, and the act was accepted in June. And it was clearly, and when you see the process of accepting law, it's clearly about protecting Christianity against Muslims, against Islam, and of course Islam means terrorist, because those two terms are kind of combined in the minds of Polish right-wing politicians. Then, of course, we have denial of participation in resettlement schemes and relocation schemes. I will skip this. We expanded detentions, especially in theory. There is possibility to detain people in some containers, in some barracks. We do not yet, our government do not yet go so far, but they set possibilities to go there and to build new centers, maybe on the borders, maybe elsewhere, but just buried in this way. We had the plans for obligatory detention and border procedures that Tomek explained, so I will not go this further. And we closed the border in Tiraspol, so we do not accept asylum seekers anymore, almost. And then I show you some numbers how this policy is highly effective. And then we have different approach for Ukrainians. We still keeping this oświadczenia, the declaration on trusted work to a foreigner, although they are proven as problematic and not very protective for migrants and not very controlling by the government. We still kept this idea. The government improved some elements, but the general idea is still there. And the idea helps, not helps. The idea allow to employ Ukrainians illegally in unregistered work, in an unregistered sector, so to exploit them there. Then we introduced the new instrument, seasonal work permit. Of course, it's due to European directive that we shouldn't implement them, but then the whole discussion behind them was let's broaden the access of immigrants to Polish labor market. Maybe I skip it. And then we had a new act that was proposed by the Ministry of Social Affairs. It was discussed for a while last summer, and then disappeared from the public space, like that, because it was contradict the very idea of the policy of Law and Labour Party. But on the other hand, we have very new changes in Act of Foreigners that is about to be signed by our president, that shift these trends a bit, making them more tough, more complicated, and it's targeting students. And my answer why we have it, because those act was prepared by Minister of Interior. So finally they have a chance to introduce their own idea, and they show them. They present students as a possible threat, as people who would like to forge and abuse the system. That's why we need to introduce some more control them. So, few numbers, and to show how this policy is effective. And if you see, we have a very shift and very strong very strong trend going up when it comes to economic immigrants, mostly from Ukraine. I mean, Ukrainians consist like 90% probably of all people here. And then we have complete decline of accepting asylum seekers here in Poland. On average, we accept, Polish border guard accept one family, one motion and a day at the border. And this decline is you see, quite sharp. So to conclude, we observe the process of othering, and the group that was targeted were asylum seekers and refugees there. And of course, this process started in summer 2015, and I mean, Konrad said more about that. And at the same time, and based on it, we created a good enemy, as Jock Young said. I mean, so we had a chance to have a group of people that were already dehumanized, and because of the dehumanization, we could, as a country, as a government, accept some measures to treat them as enemies, to treat them as people that don't deserve any protection, don't deserve any rights, that completely different from us, and the only reason was because we need to defend the nation, the Polishness. And it was clearly said and clearly stated by our representative. It is the quote from Jacek Skiba, deputy of Minister of Internal Affairs at that time, from interview that he gave to Bulletin Migracyjny. And you see, he said very clearly about those distinctions between two approaches. We accept and welcome people that are close to us, Ukrainians, and we say strong no, and we will build some walls against terrorists, means asylum seekers that we don't want in Poland. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor. Now our fourth speaker, Katerina Krakhmalova from the International and European Law Department, the Faculty of Law from the National University of Kyiv, Mohyla Academy. She's going to deliver us her presentation entitled Ukrainian-Polish Migration Challenges, Legal and Policy Aspects.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I would like, first of all, start with two words of appreciation. So, first of all, obviously, my first addressee of those words would be organizers and Dr. Prochodska in particular for giving me the opportunity to stand here today before you. And my second addressees of these words of appreciation would be all of you for actually staying for so long. And hopefully, I will not bore you and give you some potentially useful, interesting information for future researchers. And my second very brief actually side note would be that obviously the name of our panel is Migration in the EU, Poland's Perspective. Being not Polish, I think it would be diplomatically wrong from my side to give you Polish perspective. But I have chosen, therefore, a topic which is equally important for Poland and Ukraine. As you see from the name of my presentation, I actually have chosen a case study. And this case study is, I think, a fair enough choice because here I can speak about Ukrainian perception of Polish perspective and also about Ukrainian perspective being Ukrainian. Finishing with introductions, what I would like to very briefly, obviously, and probably not in depth, but still cover as a sketch during this presentation would be 4 matters. So I would like to start with general things like Ukrainian and Polish migration policies and compare them as to main actors, forms or shapes in which they are mirrored, and then some actions and priorities, and actually see what we have in common, because we do. Then talk a little bit about specificity of social security for migrants, and then move on to my particular test case, because being quite a lawyer who likes to have everything precise and to test everything, I decided to check one particular legal instrument which is very much prized to see whether it works, and if does, then for how big amount of beneficiaries. So if we are going to talk about actors, here obviously I'm 100% sure for Ukrainian part, for Polish part, because majority of you are Polish experts. Then if you disagree with something, then I'm absolutely open if you would correct me later at the question stage. But for Ukraine, actually we have seen a twist and adoption of new migration policy. And I can quite confidently tell you what is the migration policy of Ukraine, because it's embodied in binding legal instruments. So after 2013-2014 events in Ukraine, we had actually several new laws. One of them was law on external labor migration, which in its preparatory documents, it said that it was actually written and then later voted on and came into force because it was one of the Ukrainian obligations as a part of closer integration with European Union. And then we also do have a national strategy of migration, strategy of the state migration policy of Ukraine, which exists at the level of bylaw. And then it's not only strategy, but also an action plan for the years 2018-2021. And then there will be a second part of this action plan coming up later. And obviously, without doubt, some basics, fundamentals for migration policy are set already in the constitution. Therefore, I have checked, obviously, all these documents. And what is quite curious is that Ukrainian migration policy, this new one, first of all, it's centralized, because even in the action plan, where there are 46 different steps to be taken within these years, I have not found a single non-state actor who would be responsible for implementing it. So in essence, state is taking it all on itself. And here we are talking about different, basically, agencies of central government. And then, as far as I understand how current Polish migration policy looks like, it's rather fragmentalized, and then it has multiplicity of actors, because Polish migration policy, which was also in form of legal document, was declared to be non-binding, together with implementation plan for it, as long as in 2016, and there is new one being drafted somewhere underway, but it's not there yet. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Therefore, that's the difference at this level. And then I looked at actions and priorities of actually Ukrainian Polish migration policies. And first of all, I have to confess that I'm proud of Ukrainian current migration policy, because being a binding legal document, it has also some philosophical and actually some very candid, let's say, content in it. For example, one of Ukrainian migration aims is actually return and making it more attractive. And what it says, that immigration and its negative consequences cannot be lessened by direct legislative and or administrative regulation. And this is something which is stated in the bylaw. So there are both legal and non-legal means how this return is going to be, let's say, become more attractive for Ukrainians currently working abroad. But also it says that obviously we as a state have obligation to take care of rights and freedoms of those Ukrainian migrant workers in other countries. And even though our, let's say, means are limited, but there are some things we can do, like consular care, then cooperation with different organizations, informational, educational campaigns, and then especially this is signing international agreements multilaterally and bilaterally. And then because Polish migration policy has multiple actors, and state is currently silent on what its position is, then many of these actors give messages in relation to Ukrainian migration which are very confusing. Because on one hand, we have very heartwarming initiatives. Like there was launched an initiative in Lublin, Lublin uczy się ukraińskiego, Lublin learns Ukrainian. Or we have particularly, I would say, successful and thoughtful policies of particular local self-governments in relation to migrants in general and Ukrainian ones in particular. But then, for example, practices of state bodies and of individual, even, let's say, representatives of those state bodies has been very different and unfortunately not always positive, and there are a lot of, let's say, critical issues in it. Issues to be actually critical about. And then also we have all those polls on societal attitudes, which unfortunately shows that there is division in society, and there is also, unfortunately, reality of such things as hate crimes. I think, but still we do have actors which, the same as Ukrainian side, actually promote and lobby for protection of rights of migrant workers. And here I'm talking especially about ethical business, about NGOs, about even non-formal groups of Polish citizens who do a wonderful job on this matter. This was actually one of the reasons why, for my case study, I have chosen study of international agreement, because that's something that unites us in this regard as an instrument for settling these migrational questions between Ukraine and Poland. And then the reason why I have chosen not just any type of other international agreement, but this particular one from 2012 on social security, is that while on one hand many authors say that migration itself is a social security mechanism for migrants and their families, then obviously migration brings its own set of vulnerabilities and risks. And here I particularly like four types or four dimensions of these vulnerabilities by Rachel Sebates-Wheeler and Ian Mark Oslon. And basically what they have said that migrants are vulnerable temporarily, especially at the initial stages of their migration, when they're basically like children not speaking language, not knowing anyone. Then there is a special dimension of this vulnerability, especially if we're talking about going to some more remote places in which this migrant cannot easily, pack and go back home. And then also there is a social political dimension because, majority of migrants, especially if you're talking about the temporary ones, they don't vote. Therefore, basically, they don't have political voice. And then we're talking about social, cultural differences, which are less of a factor if you're talking about Poland and Ukraine, but they still do exist to a smaller extent. And then we do have this second reason why social security is important for migrants, which is social justice and fairness considerations. And actually, I'm fully aware that this social justice and fairness works both ways. I mean, on one hand, we shall probably not have free riders, meaning people who do not contribute but then want to use or abuse certain systems. But then, on the other hand, most probably, as a matter of justice, it would be fair that those who do contribute actually also are able, in case of need, to make use of those systems. And then, probably what is third, last, but the most important, is possibility of social security arrangements to influence particular migrants' decisions. And here again, basically, in which ways? First of all, if we are talking about countries in which social security is not accessible for migrants due to different reasons, it means that our migrants would have tendency to actually stay in the gray or so-called black zone, not working legally, no matter how many information campaigns will make. And this comes with a cost both to those illegal migrants and obviously state as well, because state loses taxes, migrants lose actually a lot of rights, and they're prone to exploitation and abuse. And then if our social security is not portable, meaning it cannot be transferred, it's bad for the home or for the sending state, because it means that our migrants would not return. And remember, Ukraine now has this policy of actually caring about return of its citizens. So it comes at cost for the sending state. Bear this in mind, and also bear in mind the fact that binding bilateral international agreements, as of now and for more than a century, have been considered to be the very effective mechanism to actually settle migration matters. I took as an example and checked 2012 Polish-Ukrainian Social Security Agreement, which came into force on 1st January 2014, and also there is administrative agreement for it. And this agreement is very special, and because also it has a procedure how institutions from both countries implement it, and then collect information on this implementation and exchange it. So what we did actually was asked 3 institutions who are responsible from Polish side for implementation of this social security agreement, which were the KRUS, which is Agricultural Social Insurance Fund, then ZUS, Social Security Institution in Poland, and Ministry of Family, Work and Social Policy, to give this data on the ways how this agreement works, what is the number of beneficiaries of this agreement. And then, basically, while number of Ukrainians working in Poland is very disputable, and there are both scientific and non-scientific ways how there were attempts to estimate this number, ending with latest attempt actually by mobile phone operators, counting number of people calling to Ukraine and using Cyrillics, which I think is actually debatable source of information. But even for state authorities, it's not easy to estimate this number. However, the number which is clear and precise and known to us is the number of Ukrainian migrant workers working in Poland legally and paying all types of social insurance contributions they should pay. And those numbers, actually, we can check the latest ones in the report from Polish Statistical Office, GUS, it's called Cudzoziemcy w polskim systemie ubezpieczeń społecznych, from 2019. So what I did, I took those numbers of people who are here, of Ukrainians who are here, who work fully legally. Usually they have also higher qualifications, good education. So they live and work here legally. They pay all social insurance contributions in Poland, and who are potential beneficiaries of this 2012 agreement. And I compared it with the data that I received, obviously dependent on particular type of social security payments, line by line, how many people are actually receiving it in case they need it. And discrepancy was quite significant. In the, let's say, softest case, the difference was in making use of this agreement and actually receiving those payments was one person out of several hundred people who were actually entitled to have this payment. Oh, I'm sorry. Then, so basically, I'm just wrapping up the presentation with how then I tried to explain this discrepancy. And basically, that's where the last slide comes to be handy. So I checked what is the structure of this access rule. And there are 3 components of it. And then what are the types of barriers? In essence, what needed to be checked was actually treaty design. So was it the way the agreement is designed itself, that it actually effectively precludes some people from using it? Was it the matter of treaty implementation, or was it the matter of beneficiaries' behavior themselves? I'm not done with checking all hypotheses yet in here, But actually, it seems that it might be the case where all three factors, to a different extent, are a little bit involved. So I will leave it open because the time I had is finished. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Katerina. And now I invite our last presenter to crown the day and to crown the conference, to deliver his presentation, Mr. Dominik Wag, PhD candidate from the Center of Migration Research, University of Warsaw and the Warsaw Family Support Center. A presentation entitled Strategy or Action in Search of Refugee Integration Models on Local Level.
Thank you for having me. I'll try to present you some good practices, good actions provided by the cities at the local level in the field of integration of refugees, and I'll try to do it really smoothly because I'm sure that all of us are really tired. We have to ask the questions: if cities in Poland provide support for refugees, is it a policy or are those only actions, loosely connected actions? And also, what are the drivers influencing local activities, and how those actions differ from city to city? But to start, I have to tell you about the only sustainable and governmental element of integration of refugees, individual integration programs. It's very often criticized because it's only for 12 months. Family support centers are responsible for providing this kind of support. It's financed from the central government, but as you can imagine, it's almost not possible to integrate in 12 months straight away after you have your positive decision about refugee status or subsidiary protection. But this is the reality, and we have to face it, that this is the only governmental element of integration for refugees. And as you can see in the integration program, we have financial support, health insurance if it's needed, Polish language courses, but it should be paid from that financial support, and social assistance. To be honest, from my perspective, social assistance is the most important thing in this case, and financial support, unfortunately, is not enough to rent a flat, pay for Polish classes, and live in Warsaw, and probably in other cities also. So I'll show you how we try to work in cities like Warsaw, Gdańsk, and Wrocław. But you have to remember that integration programs are run mostly in Mazovia province. More than 30% of all integration programs are run in Warsaw. So we have a situation when we have Warsaw surrounding cities or towns, and few other centers where this kind of support is provided. But let's start with Warsaw. So this is the largest city in Poland and the capital. We have 26,000 registered foreigners in Warsaw, but the real number is way higher. The estimates shows that approximately 1,500,000 to 100,000 foreigners lives in Warsaw. And regarding refugees, it's like 30-40% of all refugees living in Poland lives in Warsaw. So this is really important, and later you will see why the situation looks like it look. I'll start with Warsaw Family Support Center, and believe me, not because I'm representing this center now, but I really believe that we are doing a really good job. Warsaw is specific because we have, as a city, we have a special housing contest. Every refugee, so a person with a refugee status or subsidiary protection, should have the same rights to social and communal flats like Polish citizen. In other cities, sometimes it's questionable. The reality is that it's really difficult to get a social flat in Poland. Requirements are really strict, even for Polish citizens. That's why in Warsaw we have a special housing contest, and we every year in this contest, Warsaw Family Support Center can recommend 5 refugees, 5 families to get a social flat. So it's like extra program for refugees. Also, we run so-called protected flats. Now we have 3 flats of this kind. The idea is to support the most vulnerable refugees living in Warsaw. And since 2008, we run additional projects, mostly co-funded from, it was co-funded from European Union. Now we use our budget to provide Polish classes, special counseling, workshops, vocational trainings, etc., etc. So thanks to that, we can extend support and not limit it only to integration programs. In 2015, refugee crisis, or how we will call it, erupted, and it didn't affect Poland at all, but the debate about refugees integration and migration started. It was like that time the project, shortly called VITEK, emerged, and the idea is to check how local authorities and NGOs can support some refugees to support them at the labor market, and the group of refugees supported in this program were and still is really small. 10 foreigners, some with families, some without. But the actions were socioeconomic diagnosis at the beginning, housing support, free of charge, really good thing, and really something new in Poland. Intensive Polish language courses, vocational trainings, and labor market assistance, and fast-track integration to the labor market. Marta will prepare, she prepared the report because she was responsible for evaluation of this project. I hope that it will be somewhere in the internet. So I'm looking forward to see what are the results. But now I can say that it's not applicable for the bigger number of refugees. Also, in the lack of EU fundings, we have the AMIF is frozen, as it was said before. City Council decided to support, to use its budget and to support some NGOs in providing specialist counseling. It was done before, but now it's more like I hope that it will be for a longer period of time, and it will be the amount of money will be higher and higher. Of course, we can discuss if it's enough or not, but again, it's something. It's I will not say innovative, but it's a good sign. And the last thing which I wanted to present in what is done in Warsaw, it's multicultural center. Basically, it's the idea is to provide a space where everyone can feel home. So it's mostly about multiculturalism, multicultural Warsaw. And also info point can be found there, integration activities, incubator for initiatives, education, etc., etc. What is really good over there, the place is founded from the city hall budget, but it's run by NGOs, and a lot of workers are refugees or foreigners. So it's really good initiative in my opinion. Gdańsk. Gdańsk is very, very specific. It's the largest city in the northern Poland. Only 4,000 registered foreigners, around 20,000 unregistered foreigners lives there, but really limited number of refugees, few families a year or something. But Gdańsk is famous because of their migrant integration model. It was the first local strategy in the field of integration. What is important in this document, in my opinion, that they started with diagnosis, and they saw that institutions and workers in the institutions responsible for supporting foreigners and refugees are not prepared. So they started to work on the strategy and to fill the gap, to make a situation where NGOs can support or cooperate with institutions and provide help which is needed. And that one of the NGOs in Gdańsk is Support Center for Migrants. They have services like legal counseling, information point, Polish language courses, labor market counseling, and social counseling. I cannot say how effective is this help regarding refugees, because there is almost no refugees, few families a year. So for sure, it's a great thing that they have strategy before they have a massive wave of refugees, but it's problematic to say if it's working as it should be. The third example, Wrocław. Again, like Gdańsk, limited number of foreigners living in the city, and really even a smaller number of refugees. But what is interesting, approximately 40% of all foreigners are from EU, and 10% are students. So different type of foreigners, and they started. The idea was quite similar to Gdańsk. In 2018, they presented the participation model as a strategy for Wrocław. The idea is multiculturalism and to understand each other. And they marked 4 major fields: education, integration, security, and cooperation and communication. In the integration field, regarding refugees, the main accent was on integration programs. So already the element of national integration strategy, I would like to say strategy, but let's say the only element of integration of refugees. And as you can see, it's more toward foreigners, and some activities are provided also for refugees. But again, the case is that they don't really have a lot of refugees, so they concentrate on other migrants. One of the projects run in Wrocław is Wrocław on tongues of the world. The idea is to provide the space and the platform to meet with foreigners and Polish people to understand each other and to learn Polish. I believe that it's more about interaction, more about understanding and learning how to communicate than learning Polish as a foreign language. But also it's very innovative and very interesting. Another thing is multicultural Wrocław. The idea of this project is to provide support to organizations, institutions, and business, and promote multiculturalism and common understanding. So, to conclude, in my opinion, in Warsaw we have a lot of activities for refugees. Warsaw has institutions, NGOs, experts who can support refugees, but has no strategy, which is quite weird, and I hope that it will change soon. At the other hand, Gdańsk and Wrocław, they have strategy, but they don't have refugees, and they have only limited integration offer on place. The drivers, in my opinion, in Gdańsk and also in other cities, the main drivers were willingness to be perceived as an open city. So multiculturalism and cultural activities, cultural projects. Also, refugee crisis played a role because before we had no, in the public debate there was nothing about refugees integration and so on. It was not a topic. And Warsaw focused mostly on most vulnerable groups like refugees. Other cities provide strategies towards foreigners and refugees. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for our speakers. Because we have already passed the time limitation, I would like to propose maximum number of 2 questions from the audience. Yes, the lady. And another one. Okay.
Greetings, everyone. So I'm a student. I'm currently doing my master's in Poland. So my questions are for Professor Witold Klaus. I'm sorry for pronouncing your name wrong. So one thing that concerns me is the tougher policy for foreign students. Like me as a student, myself, I really had to go through a lot of paperwork already for documentations and everything. So I'd like to know your opinion regarding a policy of such kind. Do you think bureaucracy and paperwork will attract students, which as a matter of fact, this percentage is like lower compared to other EU countries? And also during the presentation, we heard about being pro-Ukraine, and it is like, I really appreciate that because cooperation with neighboring countries is quite important. But basically, Poland is using the right of veto to block EU at this point and neither cooperate or it's ready to face with sanctions. And also is violating regulations regarding quota by filling it with Ukrainians or according to preferences such as religious background and country of origin. And regarding the welcome part of welcome Ukrainians and non-Ukrainians are considered terrorists. I'm going to say that I'm non-Ukrainian. I don't live next to the border and I choose to study in Poland. Like, yes, I'm not an immigrant, but definitely I'm not a terrorist. So I would like to know if it's the time to build walls towards people who run from war, such as Syrians and Afghans, a wall of some kind which fell for Poland years ago in 1989. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Agnieszka Gusińska. I work for Habitat for Humanity Poland, and I'm a manager of a social rental agency. And the reason why I'm giving a little introduction is that I have a question to Mr. Dominik, and it regards the housing situation, because we provide temporary housing for groups of people, and 1/3 of our participants are refugees and immigrants. And you mentioned something that you give 5 families per year, you give recommendations for social housing, and I would be interested for you to speak more about that, because we also support the application forms, but I never came across a limitation, and we follow the normal route of applications for social housing for our beneficiaries, and some of them, they were granted social housing, and I never came across about that limitation, so that would be interesting.
Thank you for your question. I mean, as you see, and as presented, Polish migration policy it's no comprehend, not so ever. So I don't think we have, the government has like quite one policy towards students, foreign students. So on the one hand, Ministry of Higher Education would like to draw some students and brought them to Poland. On the other hand, we have Ministry of Interior who would like to block some any influx of foreigners. So I'm not sure where you are actually at the moment, and then what the policy is, what the policy will be, what the policy the government should propose towards foreign students. I'm not sure that everyone in the government is really interested in gathering and bringing students, especially from non-EU countries and from far away. And then, of course, a number of actions that, especially what's happening at the moment in voivodeship offices, it's the policy not welcoming anyone actually, any foreigners, because it's tough, it's time consuming, it's tough for in every aspect of that. And when it comes to another question, I don't think, to be very frankly, do we have any, and as Polish society, do we want any other people in Poland? Not white, not Christian, with some vulnerability that we should put money to integrate them. And it comes to foreigners and to asylum seekers and to refugees, especially when it comes from Muslim countries. I think it's when you see numbers and that not presented, most of the part of Polish society are against refugees, asylum seekers, against accepting them, and it's the very essential position of current government. So I don't expect that this policy will change in recent years, and I don't even have any hope if the government will change, and I hope it will be quickly. I don't think that next government will change this policy to very broad extent.
Thank you for the question. I will not go deep into details, but you can check the local acts on housing support or something like this. I can tell you more about it later. But to get a social flat, there is social or communal, because those are the two types, and there is an income limit. First thing, and to get a social flat, you have to live in a flat with living space lower than 6 square meters per person. And this is the requirement which stops most of the people from getting a social flat. It's no. This is general rules. And our housing contest is only for refugees, people with refugee status, subsidiary protection, who are living in Warsaw, who finished integration program and got a negative decision from the general procedure. So if you want, I'll provide you details later. Thank you.
Can I say one sentence? Only one sentence.
Microphone, okay? Let's wait for microphone. Just register. 2 minutes, because we...
Yeah, one comment, one sentence. I would not agree with what Witold Klaus said about Polish society, because during the crisis from Chechnya, Polish society was very open, and definitely now it is manipulation, politicization, using these immigrants in political purpose. It means the politicians would be responsible, and I am a priest, and I could say that if they stay at the last judgment, God would ask them the question, what they were doing with this matter in this time.
Okay, so I believe that here we can finish. So let me thank you for the last session's participants, moderator, and speakers.